It would seem that everything is falling apart as we start streaming. But hi, everybody. Welcome to the Python Community News. I am one of your hosts without camera, Jay.
I'm John.
And it's one of those weeks. There we go. Got a backup camera on the ready. Yeah, definitely one of those weeks where we're coming back from a holiday. My computer doesn't want us to do that, but that's all right. We'll get in there. John, how's your week been?
Hectic as always. How about yours, Jay?
Yeah, it's all right. It's all right. We're doing a lot here. Um, Speaking of doing a lot, we wanted to let folks know we've actually been doing a little bit of work behind the scenes on the YouTube channel here. So not only are you going to see a little bit more stuff happening, but you also see some videos. Some of the we've talked to some people that listen to the live stream, listen to the podcast, and we've been learning and wanting to apply some of those things that we learned. And one of those things was that obviously not everybody can listen in live. Not everybody can, has time to check out hour and a half long podcast. Or by the time you're able to, it's time for the next week's show. So what we've done is we're taking some of the segments and we're splitting them up into some of the smaller videos. But the one thing I will tell you is there's definitely some value in chatting with us live because we're going to be talking. This is where you're going to get most of our opinions. This is going to get the lessons learned. I mentioned, I think in one of the earliest episodes that John's got like what, almost a decade of conference experience, like conference organizing experience. And I when I have questions about like how does this work in the Python community, John's one of the people that I go to anyway. So there's a lot of knowledge there. Also, just between the conversations that we have with organizers, board members, and all these other things, we tend to bring kind of a different perspective, especially if you're not in the community, or I guess as active in the community as we normally do. So if you just want the news, definitely check out the YouTube channel. There's going to be more videos than usual, more videos than we've been doing before. I think this week even like, or I guess since our last stream, we've put up like 5 videos. So you get a couple of shorts and some snippets of longer form content. So be sure to check out the YouTube channel. It's at Pi Community News. If you go to youtube.com/ the @ Pi Community News, just like our Twitter handle, you can catch us there. John, we got one smaller topic, and then we've got a couple of topics that I think are going to dive right into our extra segment. So let's start with that first one, which is DEFNA, the Django Events Foundation of North America, is looking for another board member. They currently have a 9-member board, and they have one person who is stepping down. They're looking for someone to fill that space. I don't know. Did you hear on? Is this just kind of we're going to pick the person to take this space, or are they going to work to like do an election and other things?
From what I can tell, this is an election. Yeah.
Okay.
And so we've talked about a couple of boards lately. I think on our last show we even mentioned that DEFNA would normally be having elections coming up. I think this is more of a special election for someone stepping down than it is the general for kind of the normal year round
Yeah.
board seats. But yeah, so a lot of the same stuff goes here that I think we say about boards like the Python Software Foundation and the Django Software Foundation. This just happens to be more focused on the events side of things.
Yeah, and we wanted to definitely make that distinction of the DSF, the Django Software Foundation, which we're going to talk about that later. That board is more responsible for the maintenance and maintaining of the overall language and its community, whereas DEFNA is focused on kind of North America, but just handling events in the North American region. The biggest one is DjangoCon US. I'm not sure. I thought they had some other events, and if they didn't, I know that they worked to help put on things like Django Girls events and some of those smaller events within other Python conferences. So yeah, even if you're like, oh, DSF, we've been talking about them. This isn't the DSF. This is a different group. This team works to make sure that the events that happen in the U.S. Go without a hitch, but also they do some work beyond that as well.
Yeah, and these communities are also, I think, a lot smaller than most people might assume if they're not familiar with it. So, right, DEFNA and the DSF are absolutely going to interact, right? There are going to be uh, people that do work on both sides of that, along with um, like we talk about on a pretty regular basis with other conference organizers, right? Django events that happen outside of North America, uh, I'm pretty sure can talk with folks that are involved in DEFNA and get things like guidance if not direct support too.
Yeah, I wouldn't dare say that this is like the baby board because it's not. I would say like having gone to DjangoCon, I see the two things. One, DjangoCon often sets a standard. Like when you see what DjangoCon US is doing, you will later on see other bigger conferences trying to emulate that. So I think that there's a great it's a great board to take part of. And again, as we'll talk about a little bit later, I I am I am in the mindset now where what we need more of are people participating in not only in boards but at like the board participation level, so individual contributors, voting members, things like that, things that allow you to have a say in how you want to see these organizations ran, how you want to see things, maintained and kept up, is super important. So as always, we're going to tell you to if you're interested in running, we can't tell you to go vote yet. We don't have the notice to go vote, but this is the thing that if you have the slightest interest in running, um, especially if you're in like an area that you think that you can have a big impact on. In again, where this is kind of a North American only kind of focus, but I mean, hey, maybe you're in an area where you'd like to see more things happen with Django events, and you could potentially help make that happen. Uh, let's move
Well,
on to the. Oh, go ahead.
uh, before we move on, I want to make sure that we've said that this is sort of last call for these nominations.
Oh yeah.
The due date for for applying for this is December 3rd, 6 p.m. Pacific time,
You got
U.S.
today
So
and tomorrow.
yeah, you've got 20, 7 hours or something like that.
Yeah. So again, this is one of those things that if you knew about it and you need to be reminded, this is your reminder. But also, if you didn't know about it and you think that that's something that you'd be happy to contribute to, definitely reach out now, because they're definitely working on filling that spot, filling that open spot that's going to be open at the end of the year. Now, let's go to we'll save the Advent Code one. Let's go to the DSF one because I got feelings. It's so the DSF board election results happened. I will first and foremost say everybody that has been elected. I believe I know I've personally met 2/3 of the people here. I guess like 4/7 of the people that were chosen for this, and everybody that I've met has been absolutely phenomenal and amazing. However, John and I talk about this kind of from our own blind spot in that both of us are in the U.S. I'm on the West Coast, John's on the East Coast, but this board selection, while checking some boxes, I feel has kind of left me in a kind of a weird situation. And the reason I say that is one of the things that I did at Django Khan's keynote was praise the overall diversity of the DSF board, the racial diversity, the gender diversity, as well as the geographical representation of the board. I thought that I was like, wow, if you wanted a well-rounded board, this is it. What we have now is very U.S. European centric, as well as kind of a primary focus towards the European white ethnicity kind of space, and there are folks here that don't necessarily fit that category. But if we were to say that the last board was like an amazing example of what we should be striving for, this is an example of kind of like where we're currently at. And John, like, what do you think about this?
Yeah, so we talked, you and I talked a bit about this offline, and I think, I agree with you on the note that, like, I have met several of these people. I recognize the names of a couple more, and again, I have no doubt that, right, this board's going to do a great job. Um, but at the same time, you pointed out that uh, Africa as a whole has lost representation on this board, right?
Yeah,
And so I think a lot of what we're seeing with things like this, and several other people have brought this up. So this is not, my unique insight or anything. I'm not going to claim that. Is that at the very least, from a geographical standpoint, right? Um, we have these boards that are ultimately pretty small compared to the number of people, the number of regions they need to represent, right? And uh, that leaves, right, possibilities open for things like this, where um, if Africa doesn't have uh, someone someone on the DSF board, right? There's a big section of the community that's being left out here, and so other people have talked about doing things like, people have called it like a Senate model, or a UN model, right, where the board is more comprised of, right, a bunch of different regional elections, rather than just one global one. Um, and I'm really curious to see how that kind of thing plays out going forward, because I do see people uh, making more and more recommendation along those lines.
yeah. There's so there's a couple of things. I think both the DSF and the PSF are both maybe smaller than they need to be. Um, I know that the way the PSF kind of gets around that is by having these kind of these work groups or these working committees that you don't necessarily have to be a PSF board member to be a part of this work group. But it's kind of an appointed position that you are able to focus on this space, and it's usually led by a board member or a previous board member. But when I think about what these organizations are designed to do, for both of them, their job is to enforce a trademark. It's also their job to kind of be the representation of the larger community. Like, if a company is wanting to provide a sponsorship or funding to one of these organizations, it is this organization's job to be responsible for those funds. And to me, to say we have 7 people that are responsible for administering and deciding on ultimately the greater community of the second largest web framework in Python, which is the largest programming language. So the largest programming language, the second largest framework. And again, this is just how Python seems to work these days. Because if we talk about like, okay, well, what's the largest web framework, and that's Flask, and that is effectively managed by one person, which is kind of this thing, but they've never wanted to set up this kind of model. So this is a thing of like where if you've asked to set up this model, you've asked to have this type of support, this type of funding and organization around it, but yet you're not doing things that represent the areas in which these tools are being used effectively. To me, that doesn't give me a vote of confidence that I should be providing funds to this. And that's something that, you know, when I went public on Twitter saying like I'm kind of upset with the results of this, not because of who was elected, but because of how the lack of geographical representation on this, my first thought was like, this may not be my place because I'm not, I mean, at the time, I still don't think I technically am. I'm not a DSF voting member. I have no say in this. I use the platform, but I have no say in who represents me. And that's one of the things that I know that you've talked about a lot, Jon, is like, we talk about all these elections, we talk about all these positions because we understand that behind the scenes, you have millions of people, or in Django's case is probably a few million people, represented by a small number of people, voted on by usually less than 1% of the number of people that it represents. So it's important that if you do have opinions, if you do have thoughts, if you do have this idea of like what you want to see happen, it's very easy for your voice to actually make a difference because so few people are helping to make this decision.
Yeah, and I think part of this is also, right. This might be, you know, you may give a more accurate answer here than kind of the average person, or the average Python or Django developer, even. But right, what do you think the job of the Python Software Foundation and the Django Software Foundation is? Not what do you think it should be? Like what do you think they're like actually tasked with doing? Because I don't know that a lot of the people who are able to vote in these sorts of things, or at least could be qualified to actually have that answer like off the top of their head.
Yeah, and I mean we'll say, you know, they won by ranked choice voting, which there's actually kind of a whole, a lot of people love ranked choice voting. I think that it isn't bad. I don't think it's necessarily the answer. It's an answer. But when you talk about ranked choice voting in such a small pool, it does kind of come down to what is effectively a popularity contest, and that's one of the things that we talked about in the last episode of like, hey, like how do you vote, like when you're trying to figure out who to vote for, the first thing that you should do is like open all the descriptions and read what people have planned and what they want to do, and not look for the names that you recognize, because that is kind of, it's going to set you up. And with ranked choice voting, I think what then happens is you vote for the person that, maybe you vote for the people that you would like, you know, you like their position and things like that, but then you have to go and then choose another set of people, and you're like, oh, well, I kind of already picked the people that I really like, so I don't know. Maybe these people that I know, and then you kind of go back up there. So it's I don't want to blame ranked choice voting, but like when you ask me like what does the DSF do, I think that this is something that I want to say last week we had one of the DEFNA board members actually had, or not last week, but the last stream that we did. They had mentioned that there used to be a breakdown of what the DEFNA board, or what not DEFNA board, what the DSF actually does. What are their responsibilities? Um, who are they trying to do? Oh, actually, yeah, we got a good link here. So going to, and this is kind of that thing. So this is from William Vincent, who actually is one of the people who stepped down. So we have, president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer, and then they have kind of like the DjangoCon liaison, trademark enforcement, and then like the code of conduct management. And then they have kind of these other things, handling the survey, handling the merchandising store, which, hey, that's a thing, handling the Malcolm Trednick Prize, which is a cash prize, um, handling a pie charm promotion, which, I mean, again, a lot of these things are, not only do you have those traditional, you know, the treasurer is supposed to do treasurer things, the secretary is making sure, understanding of what's happening, posting those minutes, making sure that people understand what they're talking about, or, understand that the community knows what's being talked about. But, you know, they're doing, they're like, this is a good one here. The rest of the budget goes towards sponsoring Django cons, Django Girl events, related conferences, to the ops team who manage the infrastructure of DjangoProject.com, so this website, and a minimum amount to file the required legal and financial forms to maintain 501c3. And this is a U.S. 501 status. So it's like, are they affecting the code in any way? I don't know. According to this, the answer is no. But they're responsible for the overall community of it. And if that's the case, what can we do to ensure that that's being handled properly? I mean, like I said, a lot of that funding for Django Girls, I have worked for companies that I know specifically donate money directly to like having Django Girls events. And I know for a fact that San Diego didn't do their Django Girls event because of lack of participation, not because of lack of funding. But if I weren't in that community, I wouldn't know that. I mean, I even said it earlier. We were talking about DEFNA. I thought DEFNA was responsible for Django Girls events. Apparently, it's the DSF. Maybe it's both. Maybe they work together on that, kind of like you were saying, John.
Well, yeah, I mean the post here talks about funding for Django Girls events. I don't believe the DEFNA board is right as a
Yeah, they're
board putting
not
on
they're
those
not
events.
Django Girls. Yeah, no, Django Girls has their own structure as well.
Um, but yeah, so I think that right you talked about reading through all the candidate statements, but right this is probably the first place to start, right? When you're looking at
Hmm.
voting in board elections, and I don't mean to pick on the DSF specifically. This is just the one that happened most recently, and this is why we're talking about it. Uh, when any kinds of elections like this come up, and you're looking at right who should I vote for, um, I think step one is knowing right what someone's actual responsibilities are going to be in that case, right? Because um, you may have you may see someone's right platform and say, well, that looks like it's a great fit for one role but not another, um, or right if you see someone saying something like, I want to join the DSF board and do such and such with DjangoCon US. Well, like there's a whole different other organization for that.
Yeah, they need to
Uh,
they need to watch this episode and like start from the beginning.
And so that's where my my question comes from, is like, what do you think this board does, uh followed by, like, what are you hoping to see them do? Because a couple of people have shared blog posts about what the DSF board might do in the future, or where they would like to see the DSF board going. And then on top of that, right, what about the things that are important to you that aren't represented uh, by board work like this, right? So what other organizations, and I'm asking you directly, Jay, do you think um, people should be looking toward, if they think, right, if they're looking for things that are not covered on these pages?
I think that if and one of the things that this blog post did mention, like what the board does isn't set in stone. Like that's on the page here. Um, so like being able to, I mean, like, their words, reflect the Django community and adapt as needed. I think that this is where that geographic representation is so important. Um, you know, John, you're in the you're if we'll just say if you lived in Atlanta and there was this vibrant community in Atlanta and you were a part of it, and I said it's not important anymore. We're gonna get rid of it, or hey, we have to get rid of funding. We have to make space for something else. So we're gonna pull this thing in your area. You're gonna be the person that's like, I mean, I might get why, but I'm also gonna want you to stay in my area. Like, I mean, you're gonna be more inclined to defend having something represented locally. I mean, I'm sad that DjangoCon isn't in San Diego every year. I mean, we got RubyCon now. RubyCon got announced for San Diego. I mean, it's not the same, but if if I wanted something to happen and DjangoCon wasn't doing it, I mean, the only way that I would think of advocating for it is saying something, and being like, hey, why doesn't Django do this? Hey, why doesn't the DSF do this? And I mean, I will say I did not know who was on the DSF earlier this year. I think I found out who was on the DSF around August, September. That's when I figured, because I knew that there was a DSF. I knew that it wasn't DEFNA, but I didn't know anything about the DSF. And I never hear from them. I never hear anything about them. It's just kind of always, it's just kind of quiet. I hear about the PSF, but I mean, again, you and I are probably an outlier here because we actively listen for their voice. But it it was interesting that the board itself was as diverse as it was, but as quiet as it was. And I mean, we talked about this earlier. Like, Africa lost all of its representation. South America has not had representation, or at least from the last board, it didn't have representation in the last board. It doesn't have it this year. Um, and the thing that gets me about this is it wasn't like people didn't run. They had more people run this year than they have ever had run before. Every single continent except for Antarctica was represented in candidacy. And in the end, what we wound up having was the UK, the US, and Australia. And that's kind of it. So now when I think of what Django is supposed to do, or what the DSF is supposed to do, it I mean, I would just say, like, speak and make decisions on behalf of the global Django community. Sadly, I don't think that they can do that effectively the way that they're structured now. I think that they can make decisions from a US perspective, but I don't think that they can speak on behalf of, I mean, and it's hard to speak on behalf of an entire continent, but I mean, it's much harder to do so when you have zero representation from that continent itself.
And this is going to be a slight tangent, but um, something I come back to regularly is that the local communities are right. Not that I think you should have to choose between right your like hyper local communities and your like national and continental ones, but um, the local communities are where I've personally uh, seen seen a lot of kind of growth and like thriving from that perspective of uh, regional conferences and meetup groups and I'm coming at this from a very right community events perspective more so than a like technical development one, but um, when when looking at what events to kind of support, a big thing for me is like, um, well, PyCon US has right momentum and process and staffing behind it, right? Whereas a lot of these other smaller events, right, do benefit from the PSF. I've said this a bunch of times in the past, but are much more heavily reliant on like volunteer efforts, and then combined with that, uh, are easier for a lot of people to participate in. Right, talking with someone earlier today about right the next couple of PyCon US events, right, and um, for me, it's uh, a 4 to 5 hour plane ride to the next PyCon, and um, the one following that's going to be closer to where I am, but a lot further from you. Um, and for folks like us who are kind of just like all in it, right? We both make a point to attend and participate in events like this. Um, that's an easier choice for us, right? That's going to be a thing that we prioritize over oh, over other activities we might be doing. But when it comes to people who are right, maybe not doing this for their day job, or people who are doing this for their day job, but it is just that, just day job, and they're not like expecting to spend a lot of smaller community events happen on the weekend, right? They're not maybe expecting to spend their weekends going and doing more day job stuff. Um, those those more regional events make it easier for larger aspects of the community to participate, and I think there's some similarity in terms of governance, for lack of a better word here. Um, right, you're a lot of these do sort of overlap, right? Like your local events are going to be kind of the closest things you have to a local version of a uh, PSF or a DSF, right? They're going to those. That's where the people who are most involved in both the community aspect of it and probably the kind of open source technical aspects of it as well are going to congregate. Um, and so, uh, you know, I said this a while back about the Python Software Foundation elections. I think the same thing's going to be true here with the Django Software Foundation board elections. Everybody who ran for these board seats, I think there were 30 people in total. Um, they all are already active in their communities, right? They're already doing these things, and I don't think they're going to stop. Right? I don't think they're going to say, "Well, I've spent all of this time, right? working on this community, and I didn't get elected to the board this year, so I'm just going to walk away. But um, that's I I guess I don't expect those people to all just kind of uh, decide this is no longer what they want to spend their time and energy on. But I do think that uh, building up more of that support kind of locally is going to be uh, a thing that someone like you or I could do, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
I'm also not a member of the Django Software Foundation, right? I do some Django development work, and I'm a big fan of a lot of the event stuff they do on the DEFNA side. But right, as far as this conversation is concerned, I'm an outsider. Right,
Yeah.
the Python Software Foundation, bit of a separate thing.
And you can still hear me, right? Okay. Yeah. My audio did something weird. Uh, and I want to, before we close up on this topic, there is a point that was made. As always, hey Kojo. Katja is from Brazil, so one of the people that are on it is Brazilian and but lives in Europe now. Um, I get that. I think I would still like to see someone that's kind of in that space now. I mean, we do learn how quickly things change, and it's good to have someone that has a good eye on things as they're happening immediately. And again, there is some reason, if you're from an area to kind of know what's happening in that area as well. But when we look at a few things, we talk about, what was it, like Argentina that just like started using Bitcoin as like their national currency. And then you have some of these. Obviously, you have the elections in Brazil that are a thing that happened. Some of the forms of I don't want to just talk about all these negative things. El Salvador, thank you. I don't want to talk about all the negative things, but I mean there are even positive things. There are accelerators that happen. There are startup programs that are happening all over Brazil. So like when you have a closer bond to those things happening, John, kind of like you're saying, it's not even a matter of representing in form of like, what's my opinion of this place. It is, do I have the knowledge of what is going on in my community? Like people ask me all the time of like, oh, there has to be a great community in Southern California, and I'm like, no, the Python community in Southern California is kind of sad. We have 4 user groups that never coordinate with each other, never connect, never get together. I might be biased, but I'll say San Diego Python is probably the most active of all of them, in that we meet monthly. We meet weekly. We do a weekly study group and then a monthly meetup. And the LA proper user group rarely meets because nobody wants to sit in traffic in LA. Inland Empire is relatively small, so they don't tend to have that much growth in terms of an audience, even though there are a lot of people that live there. I think they just don't know about this event. And then Orange County is Orange County. Nobody likes going to Orange County. I don't know why. And it's not even to be mean about it, but it's like we've tried to put events on and it doesn't work. And if someone said, well, we're going to do the next big event in LA, I would go, are you sure about that? And here's a list of reasons why maybe saying Anaheim or maybe saying, San Bernardino or something like that honestly might be a better solution. Or if you're going to do it in LA, here's where you have it in LA. And it's like, yeah, someone that's from the US will know that, but someone from LA is going to have a better grip on that. And that's where like things like DEFNA are so important, because DEFNA is represented by that, and they have a process of figuring all this out. When we talk about like the PSF's responsibilities, the PSF has this vetting process that takes years of figuring out contracts and coordinating all these things. But the only way they're able to even get started with that process is they have someone that has some level of access and knowledge of that space. We went, I think the greater community was very like confused, I think is the right word, of seeing like, oh, PyCon, Salt Lake City? That's where we're going? Okay. There's a lot of questions about that. And we were able to kind of feel somewhat better, at least the people that were able to communicate those concerns. We felt somewhat better after we had talked to people and we were like, hey, these are our concerns. But the problem that I have now is I feel like the DSF just, there are parts of the world where the DSF, there is not that. And Jon, you mentioned this idea of like the people that ran aren't going to just stop contributing. Like I agree, but I worry that may become an eventuality. Is that, you can only not be listened to enough or kind of ignored enough before you're like, okay, well, maybe we don't have that conversation.
Sure,
And
that's absolutely fair, and I didn't mean that everyone here is going to have right infinite time and energy for the things they're doing today. Uh, I meant to say that I guess most of the people who ended up right in that board election um, got there because they were already doing this work, right? It
yeah,
wasn't like,
yeah,
hey, I want to do Django community work, I want to do Python community work, and then and therefore, right, elect me to this board,
yeah,
right? It's I think most people start with their you know their local meetup groups and user groups and their regional conferences, and they kind of get more and more involved in organizations as a whole. And and I think that's where a lot of the stuff about locality I'm talking about comes into play, because right, PyCon US is the largest Python event, right?
yeah.
They're we'll see how long that remains true, because there are other events that could grow larger in other areas of the world. Absolutely.
I do wonder if there are some events that are probably larger that are just not affiliated with the PSF. Like
Yeah.
I've talked with PSF members, and just kind of the fact that we don't really have a good eye on like what the community in China is doing, where we do know that the majority of Python developers, percentage wise, do live in China.
Sure.
There could
And
be a larger event there.
yeah, and so my point there is like, as the right from from the data that we have, right, as the largest Python conference that exists, right, it's a couple thousand people, right?
Yeah.
It's the most popular programming language in the world. There are millions of people who use it, and the biggest event around has a couple thousand people,
Hmm.
right? And so I think part of this is also that you and I and anyone that would listen to us talk about stuff like this are far more uh, involved and invested in right what some of these organizational bodies are doing than uh, I think most Python developers would ever want to be,
Yeah.
right. And I think that brings with it a bunch of challenges of things like I've talked about before, how small of a group of people choose the next board. But you also brought up earlier things like hey, I want to sponsor so and so event. Well, that's that's just an event that happened that's not related to this group, right?
Yeah.
They share a name and some branding, maybe, but beyond that, a lot of these things do operate pretty independently from one another and from, right, any like global Python council, right? There's the Python Software Foundation does not, and I'm pretty confident in saying this, does not want to operate every Python user group and conference around the world.
No.
That would be an enormous and counterproductive undertaking.
Yeah. There are a couple comments in chat. Kojo again says a person in southern Brazil wouldn't have any more knowledge about the Python Django community in Colombia than someone in San Diego who would know about Washington D.C. I agree with that. Also, before I give my however, Jeff Triplett, and I will say one thing I love about this is that we have people who are a part of maybe not the DSF, but like are a part of the Django community here that are speaking up. So these are knowledgeable sources for those that are listening on the podcast later on. And saying the PSF has 13 directors, the DSF has 7. One is a $2 million a year organization. The other one is $200K. I understand that, and my argument isn't necessarily shame on you either one of these organizations. I don't want that to be what people think. The takeaway here is that, you know, this is bad. What I'm worried about is these are, regardless of how much money they're bringing in, because to my knowledge, both of these roles are not paid. These are volunteer roles. More than anything, these boards are supposed to be the representation of the people that are using these tools, Python and Django respectively. And there doesn't feel like those communities, like their voices, their opinions, their thoughts are represented at hardly any level. And if it is often a small number. And, you know, one of the things that, you know, we haven't dived too deep into is how much of that voice is focused in one particular area, which is usually the United States. And we know that there are reasons for that. These are U.S. nonprofits that are designed to represent a global community, which means that there's going to probably be a larger representation of U.S. members. And the reason you do that is so that you can collect those funds. The challenge that I've seen with that, though, is, you know, there's a amazing Python developer, Iqbal Abdullah, who I believe is on the PSF board. I can't remember if he's on the PSF or not, but what I do know is he has personally worked to bring a good balanced representation of Python developers across Southeast Asia. And one of the things that he did in this last PSF election, which, like the DSF election, had the largest amount of people ever run, was encourage those local leaders to run for these larger positions. And it's not necessarily, in my opinion, it seems discouraging when it's not even that, oh, I didn't win. It's none of us won. None of us were selected. None of us were elected to these positions. And instead, most of the roles went to US or European roles. And that's more of, when I talk about this idea of, you know, I wrote this little dinky blog post about the idea of replacing the phrase with the phrase underrepresented with a better word or a better phrase, which is historically excluded. When you feel like you are in a group that has been excluded from the discussion, when you feel like your voice has never mattered, and you say, I'm going to do something about it, and you have this big turnout when you have more and more and more people that want to participate, that show that they want to participate, and they're still excluded. That to me is what feels to be kind of the pain point there. And I'm glad that Kojo brought a little bit of perspective about Kacha, that Kacha does come from South America, because it was, in my opinion, much worse when I was like, there's nobody here from South America. It's like, okay, there's someone that's a South American native that's represented. But again, when you have the developer growth that is happening in Africa right now, so many amazing, talented people are coming from Africa. The PSF's vice chair, or PSF's, yeah, vice chair, is that what Marlene was? Or associate director? I cannot remember her previous title. But one of the highest positions in the PSF was from Zimbabwe, which was great. And I mean, again, like, obviously has nothing to do with the DSF, but the DSF had so much representation from Africa in this growing economy, and now there's none. It went from like 2 out of 7, I think it was like 2 or 3 out of 7 to 0, and they were replaced with seats in the US. That to me just feels kind of weird. Like it feels like we, not that, you know, again, not shame on you, but it's like, I think we could probably do a little bit better than this.
Yeah, and I think that's where a lot of the talk I've heard around different governing models comes into play.
Yeah.
Right? Because you can't represent however many 190 something countries, right, with 7 or 13 board seats.
Yeah.
It's not possible, and you know, it's also, I think, harkens back to the question of like, what do you expect these boards to do, right? Because there are I definitely think there are cases where, right, if you look at this as like, right, graduating from time you're spending on organizing in your local communities to a more global board, right, that can be a net negative, right, in terms of, right, if that's taking away from the time you were putting toward other local things, and other people aren't stepping up to fill those gaps, right, the local communities can suffer from that.
Yeah.
And so, right, there's a lot to be, plenty more to be said around, like, you know, how these things should operate, and I don't know that anybody has the right or even a good answer there at the moment, because I think people ask more of these boards than they are designed or prepared to do, right? Like, it shouldn't be the responsibility of the PSF to answer for like every event that has anything to do with Python.
Yeah.
And you know, I've said it a bunch of times before. I'll say it again, because you know, it's December. These elections are, the Python Software Foundation elections are you know, some months away now. You know, go register as a voting member of the PSF, right? If you contribute to a Python community, or Python open source tooling, you know, you have you qualify as contributing and managing members. I might have the order of those wrong. I mix them up constantly. If you make a regular donation, right, there's a Python Software Foundation supporting membership tier, that includes voting privileges, right? And that's really what this is all going to come down to, right? Is that,
Yeah,
voting is the lowest bar here, right? If you want to see some change happen on one of these boards, you have to get yourself into a position where you can vote.
Mm-hmm. And to wrap this up, the one thing that I am encouraged by is this is the second time, the second election that we've said more people have run than ever before. I remember one of the people that was elected, Jacob Kaplan Moss, had mentioned that, like, I mean, you're talking about someone who helped create the framework, and he expressed, his desire to run was because of his desire to see some representation of the community, and that he was worried he was worried about, like, the number of people that might run, and it not being enough. So I can say no. Hey Cap, I think we're good. You don't have to worry about that part anymore. You got a lot of people running, but also the other part of that is recently we've seen smaller organizations start to kind of amplify what they're trying to do as we've come out of. I don't want to say come out of COVID because we're not out of COVID, but once we've come out of kind of this, like, not gathering, or this position of not gathering. We've seen, like, the Pythonistas Foundation kind of increase what they're doing. We've seen PyOhio seem stronger than ever before. A bunch of conferences in Africa are coming back, which is super heartwarming. We're going to talk about one of them later in the show, but we're also going to, we also hear about. Was like PyCon South Africa, DjangoCon Africa, just said something about, trying to come back. The representation is going to be there. The organizational teams to represent these areas are going to exist. My hope is, even without the official appointment of people from these areas, I hope that the fact that they're still doing things, the fact that they still have their own organizational bodies, I hope that that's going to trickle up into these organizations, that their voices are going to be heard, they're going to be listened to, and that they're not going to be just operating without any type of I don't want to say knowledge, but kind of visibility from these higher organizations. And that being said, a lot of this, like you said, John, just sign up to vote. If I have kind of changed my stance on this a little bit. I used to be like, I don't want to vote if I'm not knowledgeable enough of who should run, what these roles do. But again, I have since self-nominated and had someone else nominate me to be a individual member of the DSF, so that I can vote in the next time that these elections happen. I don't we have PSF people in here, or not PSF, we have DEFNA people here. DEFNA, like, we talked about the open position available on the board, and asking people to sign up. In terms of voting, how is that appointment going to happen? Is that going to be a special election that happens? How do you become eligible to vote if that is the case? If not, it'd be good to know that information, and maybe that's something that we can share with the community. But John, we've been kind of, I don't want to say critical. What if we can be critical about something else, maybe in a more lighthearted way? Let's change gears and talk about this next thing, which I already know I'm on the wrong side of. People are gonna be mad at me. It's fine. I'm here for your vitriol. Advent of Code has started. You may as well just call me the Grinch. I'm not here for it. Advent of Code is just, I've never done Advent of Code. Actually, I take that back. I've started Advent of Code a couple of times, and what I've ultimately determined is these kinds of things are just not for me. But John, can you provide a little bit of background for those that don't know, what is Advent of Code?
Yeah, so Advent Code is a daily programming puzzle that happens starting December 1st, and goes through the 25th. It's a uh, the puzzles start out, you know, on the simpler side, and then they get progressively more difficult, right, throughout the event. Um, it's from my understanding, it's run by like one person, and is somewhat story driven. Right, there's a little bit of a framing device around each puzzle, and right, the idea is, um, right, you're presented with a challenge in the form of uh, uh, a story about, right, the last time I did one of these, I think it's like, one of the elves have gone missing, or and you have to search the whole warehouse or whatever it is, right? And right, then they set up what is likely like a classic computer science programming problem, and you're given some right simple cases to uh, define your solution for. So it'll be like, okay, here are the here are the inputs we expect, this output from, and then, um, when you're actually ready to try the challenge, there's um, a text file you download that you run whatever your solution is against, and then over the course, Jay, if you pull up I think it's just the main page of the Advent Code site. There's a um, little board that builds up over the days as you fill in the answers. So it's a fun little programming, not competition, game exercise. I don't know what to call it exactly. That people look forward to every year. It's been going on for a long time, um, and if if doing computer science programming puzzles is your thing, and you don't already know about it, check it out. It's adventocode.com. And you may find it a good way to try and pick up that new programming language you've been thinking about uh, learning. Right, it's a way to apply some of those skills in a non-work environment.
This is interesting to me because I'm still not gonna do it. Like, you can't make me. But um, there are. I didn't think about the idea of like if you're one of those, if you're like in a position to where you're trying to learn a new language, or if you're trying to strengthen your skills in a language, this is a thing to use. I am very much Pamela's on my side there. Which hi Pamela. But saying I'd rather spend my fairly limited time programming on my own project ideas. I do think that ultimately there is this there's like this mentality and expectation that I feel like a lot of developers push against yet continue to reinforce. Um, a stereotype one: developers must always be developing, and you must always be working to improve as a developer. Um, I've learned that this is mostly a U.S. focused kind of idea, that apparently came up in like the hustle culture kind of thing of like uh, where high paying jobs are competitive, you must be constantly competing. I see this often a lot also like in med school, where you hear about doctors pushing to show that they know more, learn more, are able to do more. Um, Everywhere else this is a job. And it's like, hey, I'm going to do my job during job time, and I'm not going to do my job when I'm off the clock. And maybe we're not the right people to talk about this because here we are talking about the language that we use in our day to day. But
One
I
is
do.
it is well after working hours for me. So
Yeah. I I don't think that it is a bad thing, but I often get this, like every tech company I've worked for, they've been like, either A, are you doing advent of code, or B, should we do our own advent of code? In which, to both of those, I always say no. Um,
is that really, is that a thing? I've never had
yes,
someone ask me if I've in an employment scenario if I was doing Advent of Code.
I've had two specific holiday. Well, this is the third. This is the third holiday working at a tech company where the question, is anyone doing advent of code? Are you doing advent of code? Things like that came up like in formal conversation, like in like official channels.
Well, okay, so I want some more context here because like I've probably had coworkers be like, "Hey, several of us are doing this as a fun lunchtime activity or something," but I've never had like an a prospective employer ask me about this or expect it of me as part of my job. That would be a bizarre way to ask me to spend my time.
I don't.
So is that a thing that
I've
like has your
never.
boss told you to do Advent of Code?
So, for the record, my current boss has also said I'm not doing advent of code, and I'm not going to push anyone on our team to do it. And again, it's not that we're not here to say that this is a bad idea. Actually, the question that I had that I'll pose in a second, but I have worked at a company where a lot of people were very adamant that this advent of code thing was not only a great opportunity, but a great opportunity to build developers into hacking away and learning about our personal stack. Which I was like, no, I'm no. But that I want to kind of put this in the position of the what is it about development that does, I feel like it does two things. One, it creates this sense of tinkering and kind of this tinkering nature, which, I mean, again, we're not the people to ask about this because we're doing a podcast in our off time about the stuff that we do in our day job. And then, is this not just like whiteboard interview as a hobby? I feel like it's fun, it's cutesy, it's learning whiteboard interview stuff, and the reason I say that is there's a leaderboard. Like, if it were fun and it weren't designed to help you feel like you're better or worse than so many people, get rid of the leaderboard. Get rid of the code battle stuff. The code battle stuff is absolutely whiteboard interviews as a service, in a non-competitive way. Like that's how it's designed. It is like we've taken commonly asked interview questions and turned them into a service to where you can practice on these. And then we will also compare you with everyone else that has done these things. Um, but yeah, John, I kind of wanted your opinion on this. Is are we really doing whiteboard interviews in our spare time with these?
I mean, so well, that's why I said that it's a lot of this is like classical computer science problems, right? You're going to have things like, um, they're going to be like, hey, implement this way to sort things, or do some kind of bin packing or dynamic programming, whatever it is, right?
Yeah,
These are going to call for specific solutions, or at least specific kind of like concepts in your implementation. Um, so is it a does it share a lot with those whiteboard interviews? Absolutely. Would I expect to go into an interview for a software developer position and be presented with the storyline of Advent of Code? Absolutely not.
Uh,
Because that would be really weird. It would be an extremely strange thing to be like, "Hey, you've got 15 minutes to help
complete
get
all
these
25 days.
400,000 presents wrapped before the sleigh takes off." Right?
Yeah.
That's uh, so. I can't speak to other people's motivations for doing this. Maybe that is what they're doing this for, is to practice um for like whiteboard interviews. But I think that says a lot more about the whiteboard interview than it does this set of puzzles. Um,
Maybe.
right? Because I have used this before to be like, I want to, there's this cool programming language that I've been thinking about building some kind of like toy application in, and now I got to figure out what I'm going to build, right? And this solves that problem.
Man, when I was trying to learn Scala once upon a time, this would have been a great opportunity to tinker with that. Um, that that being said, there's you mentioned that these are classical computer science challenges.
I mean, not as a not strictly speaking.
No,
Like there,
it's
I
not
don't
it's not
think
like
that
the
that is.
Harvard CS 101 curriculum turned into a fun game, but it's like the things that you're doing are kind of see it like they're computer science.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't started this year's. I probably will. I'll probably make it a few days into it, and then maybe check back a week or so later. But um, you're going to find, yeah, things um like the knapsack problem, or right, like these like very right. If you pick up a book that says right classical computer science problems, you're going to find a lot of that kind of thing represented in these puzzles.
So this is interesting to me because I'm not a computer science. I have no computer science background. You said the knapsack problem, and I was like, I don't know what that is. And this is this kind of takes me to a point that I know your 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 I don't want to say your opinion on them, but I know that kind of your positioning on the idea of like assistive coding. But there was a tweet at one point that came up with the idea of like to not to put words in the original poster's mouth, but it was like don't use coding like helping tools, especially don't use like AI based coding tools with these things. Like it defeats the purpose. I see. It's like Jeff is saying. I'm all for whatever joy whatever sparks joy. Um, that's kind of your thing. Um, I I think about this a lot in terms of when we when we do things that are designed to show people how much they know or to compare them to others around them. I feel like that is a kind of a dangerous and like competitive nature that doesn't need to exist, that reinforces some of those negative habits. And kind of like Pamela is saying in chat, moving away from competitive things in computer science and kind of pushing towards collaborative efforts. That's one of the things I actually do like about most hackathons, is that hackathons are a team-based thing where everyone, you're working together to solve a problem. And yes, there is that leaderboard mentality, but it's kind of like, I'm okay with just removing that and just being like, hey, everybody build a thing. I'm not a fan of capture the flags and stuff like that. I'm not a fan of any type of ranking or competition stuff, only because I think of the skills required to do these jobs when we talk about doing them professionally. If you're using, I'm not going to say something like Copilot because I know that Copilot does maybe a little bit more, and the way that people do it, the way it's talked about is, again, not this conversation, maybe next one. But if you're using any type of IntelliSense or assistive coding that allows you to quickly find the tool or quickly find the things that you need to write the code to solve the problem, cool. Do those things. Learn about those things. There's a great video that talked about this where, what's his name? Something Fried. You know what I'm talking about? Not Bankman Fried. I know he's also in the news, but a different Fried.
I think Freed's a pretty common name, so I'm gonna have
Friedman.
to.
He recently interviewed Guido, so he's been like popping up all over my YouTube like views. Is it Jason
Yeah,
Fried?
there. I know of at least one Jason Fried.
Okay, maybe.
But I mean, so the thing about uh the leaderboard though is like, so one, I'm only just now learning that there's a leaderboard. I don't think I've ever clicked on the leaderboard there. But two, like if something can be speed run, it's going to be speed run. And I don't think you can stop people from doing that. Like there's a whole genre of YouTube videos that's like breaking down the speed run history of
The funny thing is, I'm all for those.
yeah.
So
I find that strangely entertaining. I've watched a
GDQ is like,
I mean, like there there's a YouTube channel called Summoning Salt
yeah,
that who this is by no means related to anything about Python, but the person talks about the history of like weird glitches in Mario 64 speedrunning. Like
yeah.
it's phenomenally interesting if that's your thing. And this is going to be again, like if someone can speed run something, they will.
They will.
And I don't think that that's ever gonna change. Should they remove the leaderboard? I don't know. I don't really care that it exists, as evidenced by
Not
not
knowing
knowing
that it
about it.
existed.
Um,
The really quick, the person I was talking about was Lex Friedman. Yeah. He mentioned this idea of like giving up on Vim and being like, I'm just moving to VS Code. And like there was another YouTuber, I want to say it was the Prime Gen, but that was like, the thing that I wish I would have done earlier in my career was become so proficient with the tools that when I did make the decision to change, it felt like giving up, almost not necessarily like almost a language, but like we talked about this the last interview of like when someone is getting started with Python, they wind up using the REPL or they wind up using idle, and in many cases, and I would posit that neither one of those are really the best experience. The REPL's gotten better, but one of the things that developers do is, we argue over implementation decisions. We argue over tools that we use. I mean, there's a reason why some of these programs have rich ecosystems, when 90% of the extensions are this other extension, but I liked this color better. There's this level of personality that comes into stylizing things to the way that we want without actually becoming invested in the tools that we use. And now, again, not talking about Copilot, but again, when you have this competitive nature, what you're saying is don't do anything that's going to give you an advantage. Try to be fair about it. And it's like, okay, but if that was the case and we tell everybody, fine, write it in Notepad, run it in a REPL, publish your results then, and then you would standardize it. And that's where I feel like I get that anything that we can speed run, we will. Anything that we can be pedantic about, we also will. We will find ways to nitpick and validate why we did better or worse than the next person. And I kind of stand in solidarity with Pamela here of like, I'm never going to be the fastest Python developer. I don't want to be. But if I know how I can work collaboratively with people, to me, I will always look at that as an advantage. And I don't like, is there a way that people can enter this as a team? Or are there ways that people can go in and contribute as a collaborative unit? I mean, all I see are AOC answers.
there are no prizes. Look, I can't speak for anyone's employment experience but my own, but like being number one on this leaderboard isn't going to get you a job. This isn't a...
I know you're saying there are no prizes. I'm just going to highlight from their page sponsor. Right. Join our leaderboard and solve our puzzles for big prizes.
And what are the big prizes?
I don't know. I don't want to click on the link.
My sponsorship tells me to apply for an Amex card. So, like, to whatever extent that is a prize, the prize of a good credit score comes from. I don't know. I'll keep on refreshing until I can find the win prizes. Here we go. I gotta win prizes. This is by JetBrains, so I'm gonna guess that it's like a license to a license to an IDE that I already use. Like,
yeah.
I think part of this is you're gonna, and I'm not telling you to do advent of code. I wanted to bring it up because I know that a lot of people enjoy it, and it has started.
I don't feel bad at all for raining on people's parade.
But like, you're gonna get out of it what you put into it in a lot of cases, right? Like, your IntelliSense or Copilot or whatever isn't gonna take the text of this problem today and output a solution, right? Like, right now you have to know what kinds of things to reach for. I don't care if you use something that says okay, you asked for this, now here's the implementation, right? And because every time I'm in any kind of scenario of like, oh, well, how would you implement sorting, these kinds of things? Like, I use Python, I'm going to call sort and not worry about it ever again. Like, this isn't it's a bad question. And so, right, if your answer, if your whiteboard question is like, how do you implement this thing that is trivially importable in any programming language you can think of, it's not a great one unless your goal is to actually implement that thing.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
I think that's this is the first year where this has come up and there's been a place for me to vent, and I'll give a little inside baseball. So we have our GitHub issues, which, by the way, if you have a topic that you want us to talk about, we are in the dog days of the year, where there are not a lot of topics to bring up. You're invited to submit a topic, any topic, any news topic. If it's Python relevant, Python adjacent, please be current, event, have it be segmented around something that happened recently. But anyway,
otherwise it's hour of code hour of code's a whole different thing.
Yeah,
it's advent of code for the rest of the year. Hour of code is actually also a thing we should talk about.
I say this because Jon had advent of code in our issue tracker since like the beginning of November. So I've
I
been waiting for
Yeah,
this.
no, I saw somebody and the person behind it, I guess, tweet something like, hey, new website's up, or something, and no, the problems become available, right, on each day of December. So
Yeah,
I saw that, I jotted down in the repo and promptly forgot. Um, but to your point about the competition thing, though, like, I think I dislike a lot of hackathons for the same reason you're talking about disliking this. Like,
yeah.
it's uh right, it just making something that is um right, a lot of those are really forward about the like, oh, great prizes for the most Silicon Valley solution to a non-problem you can come up with. And uh this is uh whatever, teach their own. You're gonna do what makes sense to you, but again, I don't think there's any inherent, like, I think the leaderboard is probably fun for the people who participate in it, but there's no, like, requirement that you're uh that you're really competing. Oh, I found another one about prizes. I'm just refreshing the page. Which,
you,
good on them. They got a bunch of sponsors.
yeah, you mentioned kind of the most Silicon Valley solution to a non-problem. I will say the last hackathon I went to was the first time I'd ever considered applying to work at John Deere because they were doing some amazing stuff with like OpenCV and it was awesome. And that to me it's like those are the things that I like. And if I have still yet to have someone change my opinion that computer science is overrated. I mean, if someone wants to spark that conversation, do it in the chat, or just reach out to me on Twitter, and I'll be happy to have that conversation with you. But yes, a CS degree is overrated. The John's face said it all on that one.
So a CS degree is not and shouldn't be training for a programming job. Those are
I, yes,
different tasks.
agreed. Um, I am going to just throw up what Pamela says here. It's good that the options exist for all sorts of people out there. I just want to make sure that people know they can still count as a coder even if they don't like Advent of Code. One of my favorite conference talks was um, how to enjoy conference talks as an introvert, or how to enjoy conferences as an introvert, and it's this great talk that breaks down like to the people that are introverted or to the people in this case that don't like Advent of Code, there's nothing wrong with you. It's perfectly fine to not like Advent of Code. I actually thought I was going to be on the not, I don't want to say the losing side. I don't think there is a losing side, but I thought I was going to be on like the side that had the majority. But actually, most of the people in chat are also like, Advent of Code, not for me. Um, but also to the industry, understand that the way that you present a thing can not only be a turnoff to some people, but can be an invalidation to them as well. Because I think about this, and I think that most of the code challenge stuff that I've ever tried, the thing that has always frustrated me about them is I tend to solve the problem. And then when I go and someone's like, oh, you could have saved 3 lines, you could have saved, you know, zero point 0.3 milliseconds in this thing by implementing it in this more confusing way. And that being considered the quote unquote answer. And that is the frustration that I get with these type of things where what what it teaches people is how to find not even how to find the answer, how to find a particular answer. In your case, we will go with the most Silicon Valley answer, which I mean, this has kind of been an extra episode for us because again, light news week, but we you and I are talking about some of the topics, and I kind of told you about an idea that I have for a talk for PyCon, and one of the things that you brought up with it was this idea of the differences in industries that Python is prevalent in. And we were talking about like the financial industry versus like the kind of the VC startup industry, and the solutions that are trying to be solved for, and the way that they're being solved. And one of the really interesting, I've been having this conversation so much lately in like other live streams and other things of like, you you can still be a developer. You can still be a Python developer if Agile or Scrum is not your thing. You can still work in tech if greenfield projects are just not a thing. I mean, most people in tech don't do greenfield projects. Like, you don't do green projects ever. Like, you work on legacy code. You work on updating other people's code. Um, and I think that the industry at large really does a bad job at telling people that. And that's a thing that I believe hurt me, just in my journey into tech. So when I see these things that are designed for how do I give the most whatever answer you're hoping for solution versus how do I actually solve a problem, that seems to immediately become a turnoff for me. But again, I'm not here to be the elf on the shelf for anybody. If you love Advent of Code, it is that time. I think there's some other stuff. There's like Our Code. There's all these other programs that are there. Uh, Go ahead and enjoy doing them. John had to step away really quick, but that is going to wrap up the main topics. We're going to go into the quick lightning round about conferences. I don't have the website open, so I'm just going to remind people that PyCon US, the deadline is approaching. You have 7 days from the time that we're recording this. The deadline is the 9th of December 2022 to get your CFP in. Be sure to do so if you have an idea for a topic. This is the largest, at least that we know of, the largest Python conference on the planet. Some might even say in the galaxy. So if you have a cool idea or a thought or a topic, this is the place to give it. John, we also have PyCon Namibia, which again, what happened to my links here? There we go. PyCon Namibia is also happening. It was announced. The CFP is up, and I think it ends the first week of January. And it's in Windhoek in Namibia, and it is happening on the 21st to the 23rd in February. Again, if you're in Africa and you can get to Namibia, then that is a great opportunity for you as well to speak in front of a bunch of people, and they have people that come from all over Africa to attend. And then I'm not going to be mean, John, and give you PyCon France. Oh wait, no, it's in English. Never mind. Yeah, go ahead, talk about it.
All right, I was gonna say that's gonna be a tough one for me, not being a French speaker. But yeah, PyCon France coming up in February 18th and 19th, 2023. So just a couple of months away, which is fast approaching. So I imagine that if you're in France or Europe and in general and can get to France for PyCon, it's going to be one of the earlier ones in the year. There are oftentimes uh, PyCon US is one of the earlier conferences throughout the conference season. But yeah, there are a handful that happen before it.
Yeah. And the CFP is open, and this is a free event. So the conference is free. You can attend this. No money to from you other than your travel and stay, of course. Jon, this has been a good episode. I think we learned some things. We learned that Jay is apparently the miser of the group, the Grinch of the group. But
I don't know. I still might have you beat there.
eh, I think it depends on the topic.
Yeah.
But if you want to know what that topic is, maybe you can go back and check out some of the other episodes we've done. Usually we're weekly. You can check us out at pythoncommunitynews.com. Of course, we have the YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/ the little @ sign at PyCommunityNews. We're also on Twitter at PyCommunityNews. And if you have a topic that you want us to talk about, whether it's an upcoming conference or just something you saw in the news, be sure to go to our GitHub org, go to the topics repo, and create an issue of the topic that you want us to talk about. One of the things that I will remind people is we have been working once again on the YouTube channel. We've been doing more with the YouTube channel. So if you are interested in not just catching news on a Friday and getting our opinions, but kind of just getting the news as it's happening during the week, go to our YouTube channel. Make sure you're subscribed to it. That will ensure, I think we put out 2 videos this week other than this one, and there may be another one coming up later on. But of course, as news comes out, this should be the place where you hear about it as soon as possible. But that's going to wrap it up for this week. Jon, am I missing anything?
That's all I got.
Well, in that case, I'm Jay.
I'm Jon.
This has been the Python